What's up, guys? Back again with another video on ancient Egypt, and let's start the discussion. We left off talking about Sekhmet. Sekhmet was a lion-headed goddess, came down to earth to kill all human beings. Well, in the process of doing such, the ancient ones decided maybe killing the whole civilization is a little much. So they got her drunk. She passed out and didn't think about killing people anymore. So, with that, let's begin.
He is the god of writing. It is Thoth who invents writing. Now, writing is a strange thing. Let me tell you, strange. Obviously, it's a great invention. It's an important invention. But for some reason, the Egyptians didn't write down an awful lot of things, right? As you know, they didn't write down how to mummify. They didn't write down how to build pyramids and temples. A lot of things they didn't write down. They did write down their medicine, how to do medical practices. They did write that down. Now, Thoth is the inventor of writing. And you know, the Greeks, who revered the Egyptians, they talk about the Egyptians and Thoth as being the inventor of writing. But Plato says something very interesting about writing. He says, oh yes, the Egyptians invented it, Thoth, the god of writing. And it was a terrible invention. Terrible invention. Now think about it. You get Plato, you're going to get good old Plato saying that it's a terrible invention. Why? He says, now men will have the appearance of knowledge, but not true knowledge. What he meant was, you didn't have to have it in your head anymore. You got it on a piece of papyrus, you can read it out loud, and it sounds like you know it, but you really don't know it. I mean, this goes back probably to the old tradition, the Greek tradition, where the Iliad and the Odyssey, they weren't written down. They were memorized and sung. You know, when you said, I know the Odyssey, didn't mean you read it and you remember a little bit. You could sing the whole thing. So there was that interesting tradition, even among the Greeks, that important things sometimes aren't written down. And Plato in a letter once said, the highest philosophy can't be written down. Now, and you know, Plato was the student of Socrates who never wrote anything.
Sure
Right?
did.
So there is this tradition that you don't write a lot of things down. But Thoth, the god of writing, is the patron of all physicians. He is the god of medicine. And there is a myth which explains why he should be. There's actually a few of them. Almost all of it goes back to Isis and Osiris and their evil brother Seth. In one of the myths, if you remember, Osiris was killed by Seth. Right? He was evil. Right? Evil. And then Isis resurrects him. Right? So she has great power also. We'll get to that. But Seth is still alive, and their son, Horus, who was the falcon, does battle with Seth. Doesn't kill him, vanquishes him, beats him. But in the battle, and this is the medical part, Horus's eye is taken out. He loses an eye. Now, the pieces of the eye are found. But there's one little piece missing. And according to the myth, the god Thoth, the god of medicine, supplies the missing piece and restores the eye of Horus. And the eye of Horus became a magical amulet for health. So Thoth, by magic, restores the eye of Horus, and this is a sign of health. So Thoth is understandably a god of physicians. There's another myth in which he actually saves Horus's life. Now remember, Seth still exists, the evil is always in the world, and Isis is hiding her son Horus from Seth at one point, the infant Horus, when he's a baby. And she hides him in a thicket, but Horus is stung by a scorpion and dies. Dies. And Isis starts wailing and crying. And she wails and cries so loudly that it goes up to the gods. And Horus comes down. And Thoth comes down, sees the dead Horus and says, "O poison of the scorpion, come out." And Horus resurrects. So Thoth has resurrected the dead Horus. So he really is, understandably, a god of physicians. And this is why many physicians also came from temples of Thoth. They were associated with Thoth. Later, the Greeks are going to pick up on that myth, and Thoth is going to become their Hermes. Right? And you get this tradition of Hermetic writings, secret writings. Those are writings of Hermes that are lost. That's what it means. So this all comes from Egyptian mythology. It's interesting. Now, the third and most important, perhaps, of the goddesses and gods associated with medicine is Isis, of course. She has resurrected her own husband. That's pretty good. But there's a wonderful story that's, again, very close to the Bible, this time the New Testament, of the laying on of hands. Now, according to this story, Isis and her little infant Horus are fleeing from Seth. They're trying to hide. And Isis is sort of accompanied by a bodyguard of 7 little scorpions. Now, 7 is, of course, a magical number. There are 7 sacred oils, but she's got 7 scorpions going with her. And she knocks on the door of a lady's house looking for shelter. And the lady sees the scorpions, I think, and she's, "No, we don't have any room." And here's this mother and child, right? A goddess and a child is a god, looking for shelter. And the lady says no. It's sort of like no room at the inn. And then the scorpions become angry. And they put all of their venom on the tail of one of them. So one of the 7 has all of the venom of the 7 scorpions. And this woman has a child. And it stings the child, and the child dies. Now, the woman is, of course, distraught that her child has been killed by this little scorpion. And Isis takes pity on this woman and puts her hands on the child. It's the laying on of hands, and heals him, and the child resurrects. So Isis too has this power of healing hands, and resurrection. Right? So we get these gods are associated through mythology with healing and resurrection, and that's why physicians came from temples associated with these gods. Right? Now, where did you go for healing? They didn't make house calls. This wasn't like traveling physicians. They were priests. You went to the temple for your healing. You actually went to the temple. Hands and resurrection. Right? So we get these gods are associated through mythology with healing and resurrection, and that's why physicians came from temples associated with these gods. Right? Now, where did you go for healing? They didn't make house calls. This wasn't like traveling physicians. They were priests. You went to the temple for your healing. You actually went to the temple. It was like the clinic. It was. And one temple that was really associated with healing was Dendera. It's a temple in the south of Egypt. It was dedicated to Hathor, who was also associated with Isis. And if you were sick, you could go to Dendera, and you could have dreams there that would tell you what to do, so you would be cured. So, for example, there were little rooms in Dendera where you could sleep overnight in the temple, in these sacred grounds. Remember how sacred temples are in Egypt. We're so used to being taught that you go to church, you go to synagogue on a certain day. That wasn't the Egyptian practice. Temples weren't for the people. No way. They were for the priests. These were secret, special places. So if you went to a temple to sleep overnight, it was a big deal. It wasn't like sleeping in the back of the church. So you could expect some great dreams. So people often went to these temples to have dreams, to hear how to be healed. There was also...
Okay. Ooh, that's a lot of knowledge to soak in. Black folk. We've been talking about grandmamas, our great-grandmamas, and grandma before that. Get up early, clean yourself up, and get ready to go to church. Okay. Ain't nothing wrong with that. But again, I personally feel like white folks is always trying to outdo each other. So when it comes to ancient Egyptian historical facts, one white person's going to say one thing, another white person's going to say something else. But at the end of the day, all of the stories have been passed down from one generation to another. It might be distorted, but there's some truth in those stories. So when you hear these doctorate type people, historians, talk about certain things, you get this feeling like, yeah, that could have happened. Or you feel like, nah, I'm not feeling that. Nah, ain't no way. Black person ain't gonna do that. That ain't in our nature. When it comes to what he's talking about now, he's saying that the churches, what would become the churches, was not for the people. It was for the priests. The priests gave you permission to come to the house of God and worship. But that was only when you were in dire need of spiritual clarity, when you had something going on with you and you couldn't figure it out. It's not like the Catholic Church where, you call up a priest and the priest comes to you. You had to go to the priest. Our whole culture, ancient culture, has been so watered down by the Greeks and the Romans, and later on the Catholics, that sometimes I find it hard to know what's true and what's not. So I rely on what I've learned growing up as a black person. I rely on the stories that I've heard from my grandmother, aunties, great aunts, great uncles. And the stories are usually passed down from the female side of the family. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I remember hearing something like that. So he's saying a lot of information, and some people might feel like he's not being truthful, like a lot of other so-called scholars. But dig deep, think back to what your grandma and the other women in your family told you, all the elders. Think back to those conversations. Think back to what you heard. And you'll know if it's true or not. He's already made comparisons between the Bible and ancient Egyptian culture. One of the biggest things he's discussed, and probably will discuss further on, is the fact that Horus, the god Horus, was trying to be killed by his uncle. They were looking for him to kill him. Already killed the daddy. Might as well kill the kid so it won't be no heirs to the throne. But at the same time, that story sounds familiar, but it's not in the way that this story is being told. In the Bible, Mary has to leave town because King Herod, wants to kill Jesus. Okay. So she has to hide him. But with all this going on, Jesus was a miracle birth. Nobody had sex with Mary to bring Jesus into existence. When it comes to the story of Horus, he was a miracle birth. Remember, when Horus was conceived, his mother had to fashion a what's the correct term for it? She had to fashion a penis for her husband. But at this point, he was already dead. So once again, a miracle birth. Nobody laid down with Horus's mom, but yet and still, she got pregnant. Nobody laid down with Mary, but yet and still, she got pregnant. Horus's mother tried to hide him from being killed by his uncle. Mary and Joseph had to hide Jesus from being killed by King Herod. There's a lot of parallels, and there are other stories that parallel other cultures. But where did it all come from? It came from black people. It came from Egypt. If you break it down, the black African diaspora, whatever you want to call it, it's real simple. You got the mother, you got the father, you have family members on both sides. Every person alive today has an aunt and an uncle. You have a cousin. That's not your brother. That's not your sister. That's your cousin. Because your parents and their parents have a blood relation. Your cousin and his parents or her parents, that's one tribe. You and your parents are another tribe. But in the collective, you're still all related. So, I say that to say there were a lot of tribes in ancient Africa. There were a lot of tribes after ancient Africa. And there probably still are tribes. In America, we don't call them tribes, we call them relatives. But your cousins are not always raised up the way you are. And sometimes that can cause animosity. That can cause a rift in the family dynamic. It shouldn't, but yeah, sometimes it happens. So all this fighting one another over resources, it makes no sense when we need to be pulling our strength together and taking care of each other. We did it before, but because there were jealous people in the world, they came into our communities and they burnt it to the ground and they slaughtered the people that lived there. So I want to reflect on these stories of where we come from as a people. Yes, I already am aware that some white people are going to listen to these podcasts for the simple fact that they're intrigued. They want to know what's really going on, what happened. Why are they so bitter? Why are the Negroes so bitter? Why? What have we ever done to them? A lot. You done a lot. Okay, white people? Look, my brothers and sisters, I got this. Y'all just hold on. I need to talk to the Caucasian people real quick. All right, white people. The reason why you need to be listening to these programs is so that you can better understand why we feel the way we do. Everything in our culture, we have had to piece together and reboot. You know, take pieces from this tribe, pieces from that tribe, and we make something happen. That's because we don't have the original script. You guys took it, burnt it, incinerated it, because you didn't want the children of the ancient world to rise up against your ancestors. If they were to find out what really happened, they could retaliate. So you had to break them down. You had to break them down physically. You had to break them down mentally. And I understand that, but I don't accept that. In the modern world, if you commit a crime, even if it's 10, 15 years later, if there's any evidence that you committed that crime, they will hunt you down. Even if the person in charge is retired, they'll leave a script behind for somebody else, for the next person to follow. But when it comes to reparations, when it comes for the payback, the first thing y'all say is, well, it's not our fault. That was our parents. No. This is a criminal act. This is a criminal act. Your parents were in on it. Your great-grandparents were in on it. And their parents were in on it. And black people want respect at all times. Not just sometimes. We want our respect. We ain't asking for no handout. We done already proved that we can do it on our own without y'all. What we're asking is that the next time that we build ourselves up, stay the fuck out the way. If you're not going to help us rebuild, then stay out of the way. Don't come trying to arrest people because white people got killed for trying to kill us. Because that's what you did. That's exactly what happened. And then you taught your ignorant ways to the next generation. So if you teach your ignorant ways to the next generation, then the next generation should also be charged with responsibility of paying back the debt that is owed. That's like when a person owes a credit card company and they send it to a bill collector. Some years go by, and then that bill collector sends it to another bill collector, and it starts over again. Yeah, it's like that. So, let's wrap this up, and I will chat with you guys later.
Also, the water cure. And this is, I'm sure of it, is the origins of holy water. There were statues in the temples called Sippi. They're usually statues like a stela, small stela, the round top thing, carved with Horus, the infant Horus, who becomes very powerful, of course. And he's standing on a crocodile, and he's holding scorpions. The idea is he's got everything under control. And what they did, the priest would pour water over the top of this little statue. mummification. It was important. So you can go to temples for cures. And, remember Queen Hatshepsut's temple, Deir el-Bahari? That beautiful temple where she put the scenes on the walls of the obelisk being moved and the expedition to Punt? Well, centuries after Hatshepsut died, centuries after she was dead, in the late period of Egyptian history, that temple was being used as a clinic. On top of the roof of that temple, there were physicians, priests, and you could come there and get healed. And on top of that temple are inscriptions on the walls of even Greeks who came and said, I came here, I asked the god for help, and I was cured. Farewell. Right? These temples were associated with famous earlier physicians. For example, Imhotep, remember the architect of the step pyramid of Zasur? Way back in the 3rd dynasty, when we talked about the Old Kingdom? Imhotep was the royal architect, but he was also the royal physician. And he later became a god, Aesculapius, the Greek god of healing. So, associated with this temple was the god Imhotep, right? There was also Amenhotep, son of Hapu, right, who was the great another architect-physician. People came to ask for their blessings. So, you went to temples for healing. It was an important thing to do if you were sick. It was your only hope. Now, were there anybody else who were physicians besides the priests? One theory was, and I'll tell you why I don't think it's the right theory. One theory is that a lot of Egyptian medical science came out of mummification. Now, it's not a bad theory, it's not a foolish theory by any means. Egypt was famous for its physicians. Famous. If a king of a foreign country was on good terms with the Egyptian king, he would say, send me a physician. They were renowned, Egyptian physicians, throughout the ancient world for their skills. In Egypt, medicine was called the necessary art. Necessary art. And many people feel that one of the reasons that Egyptians were so good at medicine is that they practiced mummification, and that's how you learn anatomy. You're taking out internal organs as part of the mummification process? These guys were learning anatomy. As a matter of fact, if you read ancient Greek medical texts, they often say, I wish I had studied in Egypt, because there they could practice dissection. See, Greece forbade the cutting up of a human body. You couldn't cut up, body was sacred. So they practiced on primates. If you went to medical school, you might have an ape or something like that, but you didn't have a human. You didn't. So many Greeks even said, I wish I had studied in Egypt. So many people feel, and it's a reasonable theory, that the Egyptians were so good because the embalmers had all that anatomical knowledge. I don't think it's the correct theory, though, for two reasons. One is, first of all, the embalmers were on a different level from the physicians. They were considered a little bit like outcasts, just a little. They were dealing with dirty things. They were smelly because they worked with chemicals. So they were a little bit outcast. But also, when you think about how mummification took place, and I'll be giving a whole separate lecture just on mummification, you'll see. But the internal organs were taken out through an incision only about 2.5 inches in the abdomen. You don't see much anatomy that way. You're kind of pulling things out in the dark almost. You don't see the relative position of the gallbladder, the liver, the kidneys. No. So I don't think they really learned that much good